There are over 128 million posts tagged on Instagram alone with the hashtag blessed. In general, as people, we are pretty good at attributing all of the amazing things in our lives to God's work. But we are less equipped to be able to understand God's presence in all of the shitty things that happen in our life or in our world. What do we do at those times where it seems like everything is falling apart? How do we make meaning from suffering? Why the hell do bad things happen to good people? As people of faith, these are all questions that are ultimately about our God. The conventional wisdom of the world uses a punishment and reward model. That is, if we do good things, then we should be rewarded. Or if we do bad things, then we should be punished. Or at least if we are a little shady in our lives, then we at least understand why then something bad could happen to us because we deserve it. And for a long time, this is also the way that people understood God's work within our world. In fact, in Deuteronomistic history, which lays out this foundation of God's law in the Hebrew scriptures, it is asserted that God's divine justice is reserved for those who are most righteous. That is, if you do all the right things and you were pleasing to God, then God would be good and just to you. But then here enters the story of Job, and this idea that God does good to those who are good begins to unravel. Because Job was a good guy. He was righteous. He did all of the right things. He prayed. He was good to his family. He loved and revered God. Yet nearly the entire book of Job details the destruction of everything Job held close to him. By the end of the book, nearly everything Job holds dear, his property, his family, his wealth, even his physical health, has been taken from him. And reduced to misery and suffering, Job begins to cry out and begins to try and make sense of his situation and why all of these things were happening to him, a good and righteous man. Now, nestled in between Job's cries are a later addition to this story. We're not exactly sure who wrote it, but it could have been added on as some sort of commentary on God's wisdom in the midst of suffering. The people who first heard this story of Job were likely Israelites who were in the middle of exile and suffering, like we talked about with Jeremiah last week. And like Job, they too may have been seeking meaning in the midst of their own suffering. So what did they have to say about God's wisdom? It writes, "But where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? Mortals do not know the way to it, and it is not found in the land of the living. The deep says, 'It is not in me,' and the sea says, 'It is not with me.' It cannot be gotten for gold, and silver cannot be weighed out as its price. It cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir, in precious onyx or sapphire. Gold and glass cannot equal it, nor can it be exchanged for jewels of fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral or of crystal. The price of wisdom is above pearls. The crystallite of Ethiopia cannot compare with it, nor can it be valued in pure gold. Where then does wisdom come from? And where is the place of understanding? It is hidden from the eyes of all living, and is concealed from the birds of the air. Abaddon and Death say, 'We have heard a rumor of it with our ears.' God understands the way to it, and he knows its place. For he looks to the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When he gave the wind its weight and apportioned out the waters by measure, when he made a decree for the rain and a way for the thunderbolts, then he saw it and declared it, and he established it and searched it out. And he said to humankind, truly, the fear of the Lord is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. Ultimately, Job discerns that God is the source of all wisdom, and to turn away from evil is to turn towards the heart of the world, which God ultimately made good. The good news here is that God's wisdom is different from our world's. The wisdom of the world may say that we get what we deserve, or if we are good enough or righteous enough or pray enough, then God will look upon us with favor. But what this interlude tells us is that God's wisdom is much bigger and much beyond that of the world. So that's good news. The bad news is that it doesn't really tell us why. Instead, the story reminds us that there are parts of God that are a holy mystery. At the end of the passage, when it says that the fear of the Lord is wisdom, fear here, or yirah in biblical Hebrew, it doesn't really mean that we are supposed to be afraid of God or that be afraid of the way that God may act towards the world. But instead, it suggests that we might approach God with a sense of respect and reverence, that we might be in awe of the mystery of God and trust that that mystery works for good. There are no easy answers to explain the problem of suffering, no precise formulas for the way that God's justice works in our world. However, as followers of Jesus, we can see suffering through the lens of Jesus. And when we do so, we remember that God is not far away from us, but near and close. That God, through Jesus, knows our cries because he has cried out too. That God, through Jesus, knows our suffering because he suffered too. So maybe our task when presented with hurt and suffering is to forego the wisdom of the world that says that we did something to deserve it, and to instead trust in the wisdom of God. As wisdom that we might not always be able to understand, but that we can trust. Because we know God created the world and declared it good. We know at the end of the flood, God put a rainbow in the sky and said that destruction would be no more. And that God came to the world in Jesus to experience suffering firsthand and to transform it into something new and healing and redemptive. Amen.